everyone. Welcome to the Business Growth Pod. I'm your host, Allan Draper. Before we get started, I'm very excited about our topic and our guest today. Make sure to follow me or subscribe, whatever the platform is that you listen to this podcast on. Make sure that you do that so you get updated when I drop a new episode. We drop episodes every Wednesday morning. And make sure also that you leave me a review. Let me know how I'm doing. And if there are any topics that you would like me to cover, make sure to reach out to me. Go to my website, allandraper.com, if you want to schedule an appointment with me, and let's get rolling. I actually have, I believe this is for the first time, a repeat guest. I don't mark my word, but I believe that's the case. He was in episode 12 that dropped on March 3rd of this year. And we talked about traditional employees versus independent contractors and which of the two makes the most sense for your business. My guest today is Matthew Mottola. He is he's the co-founder and CEO of Venture L, the leading platform for freelancers to run their business. He's also the author of The Human Cloud and recently started up a podcast called The Human Cloud Podcast. So we're excited about that. Excited to welcome you to the show, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks again for being so flexible. For those listening out there, what we're going to talk about is so important that literally we talked about this, 3 days ago, Allan? I think it was over the weekend. We were like, this needs to be discussed now. So thank you so much for being flexible on this and excited to talk with you all.
Yeah, no, this is something that I've been talking about quite a bit just through my social media. And that topic is inflation and how it's affecting small businesses. One of my worries right now is that the crazy inflation and what it's doing to labor costs and other business related expenses is really going to destroy. And I know that sounds like that sounds like a pretty strong word, but it's going to destroy a lot of small businesses. So give me your take on what's currently going on with inflation and how that's affecting, small businesses, and what are some things they can do about that?
Yeah, so let me step back and give you all a sort of warning, right? So I'm not an expert when it comes to the Fed. I'm not an expert when it comes to even economics. I'm not a trained economist, but I've been a CEO myself. I've jumped into large companies to help them drive, and sort of my background is helping product and marketing leaders scale through hiring freelancers. So in this lens, we're talking about how in the world do you compete? How in the world do you stay ahead of the curve? And when we talk about inflation, there's actually been three forces in the background that we need to discuss before this, because things weren't exactly perfect before we heard about inflation. The first thing is, all you out there, you've been worrying about the talent shortage, or you've been feeling the talent shortage. Yeah. Domino's Pizza has a $500 signing bonus for new people. That's insane. If you've gone around America, you see that every single street corner, there's a hiring sign. So that's been in your face. The second thing is we've seen the Great Resignation. So your best workers are probably going to leave. And we've been seeing insane stats where between 20 and 50% of workers, if they're not given flexibility and exactly what they want, they're going to be out. And so at the same time that you're worried about finding people, your best talent's leaving. So you have these two forces that I can't even imagine how difficult it is for you right now. We're all feeling it, but you have those. And then now pops inflation. And when we talk about inflation, we're talking about what it is right now, but what it can be in the next 30, 60, 90 days. So where we stand today, the numbers that I've seen is that inflation has been around 5%, but with gasoline, it's been upwards of 40%, and in other categories as well. The net is this: if you are a startup founder, if you're a leader, your budgets just got slashed because of inflation. And so I'll give you a very, very relevant example with myself. So when I went out to start Venture L, it was a venture-backed startup, but like all of you, we know that we're always worrying about our run rate. So I actually stashed aside, I think it was $30,000 from my time. And from what we all can feel, that 30,000 turned into 25, and it might turn into 20. And so your budgets are also feeling slashed as well. So those are sort of these three major forces that we're all dealing with. And inflation is kind of the camel that broke at the straw's back, right? In terms of, oh my God, this has gone from painful to my knees are slashed underneath me. And the one thing I would say that we're hyper watching is this infrastructure bill. If all of a sudden we have a $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill, it doesn't take an economics PhD to realize inflation is going to get only worse. So I guess we'll set the stage there. I will say good news. The Braves are up by 2, Allan. I want to make sure I put that in so it's not all bad. But they're sort of setting the stage of where we are right now.
Yeah, heck yeah. So I think when I really started getting involved in this conversation about inflation was just a couple of weeks ago. I realized that 40% of the money that's ever been printed in the United States, ever from the beginning of time, has been printed in the last 12 months. And there's all of these offshoot results or implications from that, things that affect me, both in terms of a business owner, investor, but also as a, creator of a podcast. One of those things is how it's going to affect my investments and how worthless cash is becoming right now, which is something that I'll deal with at a later time. But another thing I started thinking about was, how is this going to affect the employment base that I currently have, right? Because what's happening effectively is that the dollar isn't going as far. And I was listening to this real estate podcast, and it really hit me with kind of this analysis. Also, the real estate expert said something like, hey guys, you have to stop looking at homes like they increased like this crazy amount. Sure, there's been some appreciation and all of that. But he said, what's really happening is that the dollar isn't worth as much. So, when we're looking at a house that's, $500,000 right now, that was, 300,000, 350,000 a year and a half ago, most of that, or at least some of that, is caused by the devaluation of the dollar, caused by inflation, caused by the printing of cash. So, but focusing, Matthew, on this topic of, there's a labor, and it's like this trifecta, right? There's a labor shortage. There's this great resignation going on, and inflation that's just hammering small business owners. So what advice do you have for, in my mind, I have, I help a lot of super early entrepreneurs. They're starting to make their decision about the first 1, 2, 5 hires. What recommendations do you have for those that are super early on into acquiring help?
It has never been more important to build strong, deep relationships with those around you. It sounds really, really simple, right? But at a tangible level, what this means is that whether it's customers, whether it's early employees, whether it's sort of that 10 to 50 employees, these relationships are so, so crucial. And I think what we've seen is the past sort of 50 years have actually been very owner friendly, meaning if you were leadership, you generally were in power. And I think what technology has done is it's slashed sort of the barriers so that the talent themselves have more power. And there's a couple factors that we can look at for this. The first is the fact that if you look at a tech company, a 25-year-old is making more than we ever could have dreamed of, right? And if you look at what's happening with talent right now, they are in the driver's seat. And there's no other way to put it. If you are a highly talented individual, meaning you have computer science, data analytics, design talent, you are sitting pretty, and this is probably the best time in your life and probably for the next 50, 150 years. What that means for you as a leader, though, is that, oh my God, you better have tight relationships. Because anything, when we talk about change, it's not like there's only losers, right? There's definitely going to be winners and there's definitely going to be losers. The winners that are coming out on top right now are the ones that have the people around them that will fight to the death for them. So the leaders that are, to put it blunt, really shitty and have been very good at using and abusing and delegating, you're out, right? You're gone because your people are leaving and they're the ones that were already going to leave, but they were waiting on a good opportunity. But the leaders that are really good at inspiring, motivating, and retaining those around them, you're in the driver's seat. Because while those other ones are having to deal with retention issues and sourcing issues, you can worry about innovating and creating good products. So the number one piece of advice that I have is if you've been a total shit in terms of your leadership, yikes, you're kind of screwed. To be honest, I don't feel that bad. But if you're one of those leaders that have been on the fence in terms of, do I treat my talent well, or do I, worry about other things? Treat your talent well, really dive deep into treating them well. The one caveat that I would like to put on, though, is if you are a startup leader, your employees are probably very, very, very thinly overstretched, meaning they're doing more than they ever have before. So this is where sort of my background comes in with freelancers, is hiring freelancers is an ability to enable them to produce more by doing less. So for example, if someone is we just met with a client like literally 2 hours before this, and the problem was they had every single resource. They had a designer, they had a writer, you name it, but they were stretched thin. And so the newsletter hadn't gone out in a month. The podcast hadn't been done, but they were thinking about it. So what we literally did, we said, okay, what's the budget look like? Do you have $2,000 to $10,000 a month? All of you probably do. And so we were able to plug freelancers into the mix so that that employee that was stretched thin now can get more stuff done and be a total rock star. So it really comes down to relationships, but how can you empower your current employees to be rock stars? And I would challenge you, you have over 100 million experts in the world that'll work on a project basis to make your existing employees total rock stars, and they'll stay with you for their lifetime.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? That's a really good point, because entrepreneurs have this tendency to put more time and effort into getting different or new help than they put into retaining their current help. And I think part of it is because they already have someone there. A lot of times they don't know how they're doing with those people, right? There's not evaluations or regular touch points. And so they assume like, hey, everybody's happy, everything's going just fine. So I'm going to put my time and energy into acquiring new help. And so what are the things that, which I can kind of relate with a little bit, right? Like, hey, somebody just left. I have to fill that person's seat. That's my number one priority. My number one priority, just because I'm putting fires out, isn't working on my relationships with my current help. So how do we kind of flip that script? What do early entrepreneurs do to kind of make this? And I agree with you 100%. I try to be very deliberate about how I treat and the programs that we have for our current staff, for our current team members. But how does an early entrepreneur how are they deliberate about focusing on the people that they have as much, or if not more than, the people that they're trying to recruit or hire?
So let me start by saying I understand the challenge, and let me sort of empathize with, I know how you're feeling, because this is a common challenge of, do I optimize what I already have, or do I look for new? And
Right.
it's really tough, right? Like one employee, you might think that they are the best they're doing, and you need to go find somebody else. But the reality is you might be able to 3x their productivity if they were happy and inspired and motivated, but you don't know. So, and let me empathize with the second thing. If you're a venture-backed founder or CEO, I also know how painful it is, because you might have investors breathing down your neck, expecting you to have 50 to 100 hires in the next 6 months. And they might be using that as a sign of growth and success. So the first thing I want to do is just say, if you're stuck in a situation that enabling your existing employees is painful, I'd just like to say I empathize with you. And to be honest, I don't know what to say besides you might have to have a tough conversation with your investors. That's something I personally realized early on. I do not want to be stuck sitting on the other side of the table with VCs yanking me in terms of telling me what I have to do. So I want to make it very clear. In that case, I understand. You're sitting and you're thinking, I can't do that. To the ones that are thinking about optimization versus new people, it's just purely a challenge. And having a conversation with those that are around you. It's really tough as entrepreneurs. I'm sure you feel this, Allan. It's lonely as hell when you're the CEO, because you don't know who to trust. And you also feel like there's not enough hours in the day for you to connect with absolutely everybody. And so this is where sort of my advice is pick to those 5 to 10 people that are close to you and really, really talk with them. And potentially they might be the ones to have that deep conversation. And this is very, very targeted at if your company is more than 40 or more than 20. But that's sort of my advice. Is it, for me, at least for me, it's always come down to deep conversations and hard conversations. That's it. Potentially looking if there is ways to scope budget or ways to scope things. I will bring up little things, right, that make a huge difference right now. Is everyone's looking for flexibility. So if you are a CEO right now saying, hey, do I bring everyone into the office? Good luck, wake up, and that's not going to happen. So they might want to come into the office, but over 60% of your employees don't. And so there are little things like you can do, like enabling flexibility. Other things is if your employees have kids at home, they're probably stressing out. It's a really tough time. I can't even imagine what it's like to have kids right now. So there are changes that you can enable in their workflow, like things like enabling flexibility. But my general advice is talk to them. You never know what's going on in their head.
Yeah, I love that. We do periodic evaluations, and we're trying to get to this point where, and you can't just say, hey, I have an open door policy. I'm a very approachable person. Like, you can tell me whatever you want and your job's not at stake. You can't just say that. You have to create a culture of it in order for people to feel comfortable telling you what they really think. And there's this process involved, and it takes time. And they have to see that when they tell you something, even if it's something that you don't want to hear, like, hey, I really want to work from home. And, you have to thank them for the information they're bringing to you, take it under consideration, right? You have to create this culture of feedback in order for people to tell you, because being a CEO, being a business owner, you are in a lot of ways looked at as the guy that I don't tell my thoughts and feelings to, right? And so they have to overcome this to the point where people actually feel comfortable speaking to them about things, feel like they're safe, their job's safe, they're not going to get fired if they tell you what they think, because it's not until we get to that point that we can really understand what's going on. And if we don't understand our employees, if we don't understand the people that are really building our companies, we are going to lose the best talent, especially right now. It's just crazy.
Yep. And let me read you some stats that we'll be releasing actually in a couple of minutes. So this is from our friends over at Distributed, who's based in the UK. So 90% of employees want continued flexibility in where and when they work. 68% of employees would choose remote working options over in-office work. This one's crazy to me. Ready? 61% of employees would be willing to take a pay cut to remain with their remote working status. And then just 15% of workers would apply for a position that requires full-time office work. So the data, that everything I've seen, it's very, very clear. And I will throw one more piece of data and research to support what you were talking about, Allan. I think it was called the Aristotle Project. It was a Google psychology study that happened. This was like early 2000s, right? So this is nothing new. But I'm going to ask you, so what do you think is the one variable? So if you surveyed all the teams at Google, what do you think was the one predictor / variable of what made the best teams? And you could think of smarts. It could be number of people. What would you think is that one thing that as a leader really drove that team?
That made the best team? I don't know. Maybe just kind of the ability for people to control aspects of their job. I don't know.
So you think, right? I thought it was going to be free pizza, to be honest. But no, based off the way Google spends, you'd think it was free pizza or the tech company spent. But it was psychological safety. So it was the ability for people to feel like they could take a chance and not get ridiculed for it. And I will say, in a remote environment, this is what's really scary, because this can be extremely amplified. Because if any of you out there has been in a relationship and you've texted something and the person took it the total wrong way, you now amplify that in terms of the office culture. So it's never been more important for psychological safety to be sort of there for your teams. It's never been harder, because in a remote environment, things can be read certain ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, look, there have been studies, right, that say people are more productive, right? Productive, whatever that means, in an office, right? But here's the thing. Here's the kicker. There's two things I have to say about this, and I want to get your thoughts. One, it doesn't matter if those people are more productive inside of an office if you're missing out on more talented people that won't consider working for you just because you're requiring them to go into an office, right? So that's one thing, is that, look, there's this offset that, okay, maybe they are that individual who is willing to go into an office. Maybe that person will be more productive in an office than at home. But what about all these talented people that won't even consider that job in the first place, right? And then my second thought is this: with inflation and what's going on in the labor market right now, you have to pay your people more, or you have to find alternative means of getting jobs done, right? You talk a lot about independent contractors, and so you have to get super creative. And what's so hard for business owners, because they're like, yeah, but they're not more productive at home than they are in an office. Well, what you can do is you can take the overhead, right? And you just mentioned that statistic that said, hey, they'll accept less money if they have that flexibility. They can work from home. On top of that, if you allow them to work from home, then you don't have that overhead of, the office desks and chairs and the office building. And so you could take that, hire the more talented people that want the more flexibility, and pay them more to not come in the office where you don't have, electrical bill, right? All of these all of these natural expenses.
Yeah. I haven't seen data around at scale employees being more productive in the office. I haven't seen that. I would love to see it. I've seen a lot of data the reverse. And I will say that devil's advocate to the data about productivity is output doesn't necessarily equal impact. So a lot of those studies as well, I think the data can be skewed and not exactly the right area you should be shooting at.
Yeah, like what are they measuring in the first place?
What are they measuring? Like, oh, cool, you wrote 20 more, you wrote 20 emails instead of 15. Well, 10 of those emails were meaningless. What I will say is, and a lot of the data of even this data, one of the biggest things I feel with right now, what's going on, we have these discussions, is that people are looking at everybody as the same, meaning all your employees are the same. That's cute, right? And publicly, it's cute to say that, but the reality is they're not. 20% of your employees equal the output of 80 or equal 80% of the impact. So, and we've kind of seen this with a lot of companies now who have rejected a lot of the common notion of we're all equal and all that stuff. It's total crap. I mean, the reality is in your company, you have needle movers and you don't, and everyone has a place, but you're neglecting reality if you think that everyone is the same. And the ones that I know who have been the 80-20s, right? Those 20% of employees, they've not wanted to work in the office. They've wanted to work on their own time because they're generally disciplined. They generally don't need your direction. And so that's what I've seen. I can't say I've seen enough data both ways, but from my anecdotal experience, the really good employees, they don't need an office. Same thing as like, they don't need micromanagers.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's kind of this old school philosophy of, for some reason they're productive, they're around other people. And I think they're good. There are going to be some instances where somebody's more productive at work, maybe fewer distractions, maybe they don't have the setup at home that they might have at work.
And yeah, let me add to that, because that is a great point. So when we say like working remote, right? I actually do not mean working at home in any way, shape, and form. I work best from a coffee shop. I just don't work best when someone says you have to fit in this box that every 13 minutes someone's going to walk in and try to tell me a joke that's going to throw me off my flow. So that is one major myth, is that it's not someone's working at home or working at the office. So there is still a place for the office. Like, this is one major thing to call out. So if you do have a bunch of office space, don't just get rid of it immediately. Instead, what if there's ways to repurpose it? So like you said, Allan, some of your best employees, they actually probably have families. And a lot of the data from entrepreneurship skews this way. I think we fell in love with the 21-year-old, genius hacker. But the reality is the best CEOs are actually, what is it, on 38 years old based off the data. And so likewise with your employees, your best employees are not the ones that are asking for free food and all that kind of stuff. They actually might be the 35 to 55-year-olds that have a lot of experience and wisdom, and they might need a quiet place. That quiet place might be you getting them a subscription to WeWork, or it might be you giving them an office and they say they come in for 2 days a week or they come in for a couple hours. It's about flexibility, not necessarily having to be at home. And one other thing I would add is that there's also been this myth that was just crazy to me when I went from freelancing into a corporate view, is that the amount of money companies spent on fringe expenses, things like free lunches, all these things, to me, I was like, either give me more money or give me more resources. And so all that money that you're putting towards tree houses and food and stuff that in reality has nothing to do with the actual work, what if you put that money back into them for value driving activities like hiring freelancers? A lot of times when talking with leaders, their question will be, okay, well, how do I actually empower my employees? Give them $2,000 to $5,000 a month and say you can use that money to hire other people. Watch the real heroes shine.
Yeah, no, I think this idea is great, because what I've noticed is that with talented and motivated people who are doing their job because they enjoy it and they're passionate about it, those people do better with fewer restrictions. They make better decisions when you say, this is the job I want you to do it however, or from wherever, or at whatever time that you want to do it. They do better in that scenario. So I think these studies that are saying, hey, people are more productive at work, I think usually those are going to be the bottom tier people. Frankly, I think those are the people that they need to have their hand held. They need to be told what to do. They need to be supervised on a physical basis in order to perform at all. And those aren't the people you really want working for you in the first place.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And one other thing I'd add to this for you leaders out there, in terms of how do you start to shift the mindset or shift the culture to enable this, it comes down to outcomes. So in an office, it's really easy to say, this person came in 8 hours a week for 5 days a week. And I remember, I think I was watching the Bill Gates documentary, and he mentioned something like he memorized every license plate so he could see who went home. I mean, that's horrendous. And that's just so outdated and dinosauric.
Yeah.
So instead of focusing on someone's butt being in the seat, what outcomes did they deliver? If they're in marketing, how much collateral creation did they make? Not to get, to even deeper, but what was the actual impact of that? And so I will call out too, if you don't have an outcomes-based mindset and you shift to remote, you actually might be really exposing yourself, because a lot of people are having multiple remote jobs. So I have heard, and there is some data on it. We did have in one of our newsletters, people had 1 to 2 to 3 full-time remote jobs. Now, my answer to that is, if they're getting all the work done, that's fine, right? Who really cares? but you better be shifting to an outcome-based mindset, or else you're going to get hosed. Because how do you tell if someone is kind of hosing you? They're not delivering.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think business owners and managers, what sometimes we fall into this trap of, as opposed to going through laying the groundwork, laying the foundation of really finding out what the KPIs are, what the metrics are that actually produce, that produce results that create a difference in our companies. Because that's more difficult, right? It's more difficult for us to say, this project that he or she did over the last week, that's an A+ project. It's more subjective than saying, what time did they clock in at and what time did they clock out? And so we kind of get lazy. But at the end of the day, it's much more important what their level of quality was with that project than it is when they worked on it and for how long.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too. It's so funny. Like, us as business owners, by the way, and as entrepreneurs, we're in the driver's seat with this. Like, we are way better than probably your competitors if they're larger, because we ourselves are held to outcomes. So our outcomes are either revenue or some sort of metric that is quantified and more quantitative. It's the large company managers that, I would not want to be that, because those cultures are ingrained over 150 years to be based off of output, not the actual impact. So first off, everyone out there, we're sitting in the driver's seat. So I want to make sure, if you're listening to this is not doom and gloom. Y'all are ahead of the curve.
Yeah, no. And that's 100% correct, because you don't have all of this culture and these habits set in stone. And it's so much easier for small companies and early entrepreneurs, early companies, to make changes. The longer you're in business, the more policies that you have, the more habits that you have, the deeper your culture is, with good or bad, the tougher it is to change. And so the companies, I'm really worried about small businesses in the next couple of years because of inflation, because of how much labor is costing. But I'm only worried about them if they don't do something about it. If they start listening to experts and seeing what very successful entrepreneurs are doing. We're taking this on right now. I am already talking to our senior leadership about what we have to do to pay our people more and to give them more flexibility. And these large corporations, it just takes them a lot longer to move. And so I think part of the Great Resignation is there's going to be this movement from these larger companies that they're not agile, they're not able to pivot as quickly as the small companies. And so I think they're in a position, those smaller companies, where they can get this great talent that is kind of making this mass exodus from these old-fashioned companies that don't want to move, they don't want to change what they're doing, and they don't want to, give this accountability and this decision-making to their people.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, listen, inflation is a fire under our butt, and it's a spark plug. And if you were going to last, let's say 9 months of cash flow, it's now 6 months.
Exactly.
And that sucks, right? But there's no changing that. And so the process stays the same. You're going to have to adapt what I would say is you're going to have to adapt to human cloud. You're going to have to learn how to innovate faster, specifically by getting the right resources and the right time and looking outside just full-time employees. So that's, That's the silver lining. Now, the one thing I will say, Allan, that in terms of if you're a leader out there, the one thing I'm very worried about, and let me caveat this by saying I did live in Asia the past year. So this is a very, very like targeted at you, US leaders, is we're allowed to hold people accountable, right? Like we're allowed to say that we want to hire the best people for the job. And if you don't do a good job, you're out. That sounds cold hearted. But when you're talking about a freelance workforce, these people are the best in the world at their skill. So instead of hiring someone, giving them a checklist and having 6 months of onboarding, hiring freelancers comes down to what value are you going to add, at what cost, and how long is it going to take? If they don't hit that, they're gone. It's as simple as that. And it's not this cold hearted, like, old white guy capitalist type, Disney cartoon of this evil person. It's actually very mutual. And so that's one thing I will call out for leaders out there, especially US leaders. I think we've had fun talking about other things, but at the end of the day, we got to drive business impact. And the way you drive business impact is hitting your results, right? And actually moving the needle. So that is one call out, is when working with freelancers, don't feel bad. It really comes down to what impact can you make and actually hitting that impact.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I guess, as we're wrapping this up here, Matthew, how, as an entrepreneur, we get stuck in habits and things, and we do things sometimes because that's just the way they've always been done. How do certain industries that have never been known to use contractors or part-time labor or alternative forms of labor, how do they kind of mentally break that mold and disrupt the system? Because I think it's going to have to be done by smaller businesses, because we're the more agile ones. But how do we do it? How do we create this environment where we can use more contractors?
Start small. It's the first thing. Start small, then focus on outcomes. Then really don't worry about what's outside, just focus on what's internal. So when I say start small, I mean, do not worry about having to set up an MSA and an approved partner and all those things. Mm-hmm. Start with something that's literally burning on fire. I'm sure there's a million things that are on the shelf of your business that you've been wanting to do. It might be a newsletter. It might be an SEO audit. It might be actual SEM. There's millions of things that I'm sure are between the $0 to $5,000 mark that you just haven't done because you don't know how to do it yourself. So start small. And even to get more tangible there, don't go straight into hiring someone for $15,000, or definitely don't go to your agency that's asking for $15,000 to $50,000. Start with a freelancer that's willing to do it for, say, $500 to $1,500. So that's my first advice, is really, really, really just get out there and start small. The second thing is focusing on the outcomes. So I think there's a tendency, like we talked about before, to really worry about things that are traditional. In the end of the day, it comes down to what outcome are they producing. Your business, you need to be first on Google. Go hire a freelancer right now to do an SEO audit. Based off of that, hire them to get you on the first page of Google. So that's the second thing. The third thing why I say focus internally is because as a business owner, it's really tough to know what to prioritize. And this is the time that we really need to just dig deep and focus on what's working. It's cute to look at a lot of the leadership books and a lot of the innovation books and say, okay, what is my H3, right? And my 5 to 10 disruptions. I think at times like this, we've really got to bear down and just get shit done. So that's sort of my tactical advice for you out there, is start small. You don't need to go hire a big agency. You can start at $500 to $1,500 and think about what's been on the shelf. I will add as a sort of caveat is that a lot of the companies that you wouldn't expect to really, really embrace this and tap into it, it's purely out of necessity. And so what we have in the book, we have a story of one of the largest motorcycle manufacturers built out their digital experience, or their digital rider experience. Did they want to do that? Probably not, but there's no way they were going to be able to hire a bunch of developers, data scientists, and designers to come move to the Midwest. So what do? They had to tap into the human cloud for freelancers. That's generally the story. And I will say, for those out there, the people really leaning into this, they're not the quote unquote tech companies. They actually are a lot more brick and mortar and old school than you'd think. One of my favorite clients is actually a domestic coffee brand that is badass in terms of the coffee they make and the process they have. And they take pride in the sort of traditional age-old wisdom of how they produce that coffee. But they've had opportunities abroad and multiple things. And instead of saying, okay, how do we get this full-time employee, or how do we get this agency? They tapped into freelancers. So instead of just sitting on the shelf, they've been able to spin up things like leadership decks, presentation decks, investment decks, animation videos that have that hurrah, all this. Usually for under $5,000 in terms of the project size, because they needed to, right? It was purely out of survival. So that's my advice. Start small. Look at that shelf, figure out what hasn't been done because you think you can't do it. The reality is there's someone out there that can help you with it.
Love it, man. It sounds like you know your stuff. Matthew, where can people find out more about all the things that you are accomplishing and working on right now?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn directly. I'm more than happy to talk. If you're going to sell me something, don't connect with me. As you know, Allan, our
LinkedIn's
things are
bad.
filled with, oh man, it's starting to get, but I'll tell you what, if you connect with me personally and you don't say I'm looking to sell or it's not obvious you're looking to sell, I'm totally going to connect with you and we're going to talk further. Also with the book, Search the Human Cloud book. And we have some secrets coming up, but Allan, I'll make sure I tell you so you can exclusively tell your listeners. And yeah, it's all about getting you to scale, right? I mean, we have a very, very exciting time ahead of us. And I think the message that I want you all to hear is, listen, inflation sucks and it's not going to get any better, but it's putting our backs against the wall. And for us innovators, right, this is the time that we thrive.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, best of luck with everything that you're doing, and look forward to speaking with you in the future.
I can't wait. Thanks, man.
All right.
Go Braves.
Thanks,
Go Braves.
All right, let's go.